A week now since the shocking revelations of the large-scale child abuse in Rotherham came to light, the whole scandal is still shrouded in a fog of secrecy. More than 1,400 young girls were abused over a period of 16 years, mainly by men from the town's Pakistani community, a community where any hint of abuse was routinely underreported, surrounded by a culture of silence and the fear of family shame. But one woman has found the courage to speak out. Ruzwana Bashir says deeply entrenched cultural taboos kept her quiet when she was abused in her hometown of Skipton. That's about 60 miles from Rotherham. She was just 10. She later overcame her family's reluctance to take her abuser to court and saw him jailed. She went on to found a travel company based in San Francisco, from where she joins us tonight. Ruzwana, can we just start with the report which suggested of these 1,400 girls, nearly all of them were white. And there seemed to me, when I was in Rotherham last week, real evidence of underreporting by Pakistani girls. Do you believe it is for Pakistani girl victims now to have the courage to do what you've done?
Yes, I think it is. Actually, when you look at the Rotherham report, Professor J did actually take notice of the fact that there was this huge underreporting that was going on of abuse within Pakistani communities. In fact, local women were actually reporting the fact that there were abusers and gangs that were waiting for Pakistani heritage girls outside their schools. She cites the fact that the UK Muslim Women's Network actually has a report on grooming and prostitution of Muslim women that went on all over the UK. And the cases there were incredibly brutal. These women were raped, they were burnt with cigarettes, they had the same kind of abuse that the girls in Rotherham had. And so there is just this massive underreporting that's going on with Pakistani victims. And there are a few factors that are involved in that. The first is just that you have these communities that are pretty deprived. There's a lack of education, they're deeply patriarchal, they're often misogynistic, and when you have all of these kind of this situation combined with a huge issue around shame, victim shaming and blaming, which means that a family will ostracize their child if she speaks up and says, I was abused. These factors mean that no Asian women really feel comfortable coming forward. Even for me, it took 10 years of being outside of the community to actually be able to come back and say, I was abused.
Was that the key, that you were outside the community? I mean, you amazingly went from school in Skipton to be president of the Oxford Union, and you were right out there. What actually persuaded you then to go after your abuser?
Well, I never talked to anyone about it until I was in my 20s. Such is the nature of this shame that you're kind of quite paralyzed by it and you don't want to talk to anyone about it. And so I didn't acknowledge it, even to myself, until I was in my 20s. And then at that point, I really wanted to go and do something about it, but I was actually very aware of the impact that it would have on my family. I was aware that I had a sibling that lived in the community, that her kids were going to be affected, that people were going to be ostracizing and shunning her. And so that was one of the reasons that it took me a little longer to be able to come forward, and I was able to get her on board and come together to be able to testify against it. My parents were still challenged against it. They didn't want me to go forward. But if I'd lived within that community, knowing that they were going to shun me, that they were going to blame me, they were going to say that I was a liar, it would have been a lot harder. And I have a huge amount of respect for those.
I think you argue that, in fact, your parents, for no fault of their own, but in many ways represent exactly what is going on in that British Pakistani community, that there is this utter reluctance to confront what is clearly, obviously going on.
There is, and I think that the fact that there is this whole taboo around shame for victims means that you just perpetuate the abuse. It keeps happening. So, for example, the person that abused me had actually abused someone else 20 years earlier, and he actually ended up testifying with me. But in between, there were many other victims. There were often female victims, and the shame of the whole thing meant that they weren't willing to testify with us. And so,
let me ask you something, because you could encourage girls to come forward by telling us how. I mean, you're now the chief executive of an important company there in California. How have you done it? I mean, and we don't have long, we only have about half a minute, but I mean, it could encourage them. How have you done it and survived from this awful ordeal?
Well, I think that the women who have suffered this have extraordinary resilience. And that resilience means they're not victims, they're actually survivors, and they can do anything that they want to do. And so I'd call upon them and I'd call upon those communities to give them the support that they need so that they can come forward, share their abuse, bring the perpetrators to justice, because that's absolutely essential.
Ruzwana Bashir, thank you so much indeed for talking with us. Let's hope that what you've said and your courage in doing so will persuade many more to come forward. Thank you.